Okay, so some more simplifying of trig identities. In number 33 here from some random book on some random worksheet, we're asked to see what the cotangent times the sine can be reduced to. Okay, so let's see what we can reduce that to. And we do it using trig substitution. So one strategy is to write everything in terms of sine and cosine. Okay, we use that one a lot when we're doing this trig simplification. So the cotangent, hopefully you know, is a ratio of the cosine of an angle to the sine of an angle. So we replace cotangent with cosine over sine, and we're still left with the multiplication of timesing that thing by sine. Okay, so since we have a fraction times a number, I'm going to make that into a fraction. And multiplying these things together gives me the cosine times the sine over the sine. And anything divided by itself is 1. So that just simplifies down to just being the cosine. Get rid of that. Just makes it prettier. Okay, so if I took the cotangent of an angle and multiplied it by the sine of an angle, that is the same thing as if I were to have taken the cosine of the angle in the first place. So moving over here, we have sine times the product of the cosecant minus the sine. Okay, so I know we say reduce first, or rather rewrite, but let's do some distributing. Since trig things behave like numbers, only they're words, we can still distribute into other things. So this gives me the sine times the cosecant minus sine times sine is sine squared. Okay, forgive me for leaving off the phi there, but I'm not going to write that until the end. Okay, so now we're going to do our trig substitution and replace cosecant with its friend, which is 1 over the sine, so those ones are equal. 1 over the cosecant is the same as the sine, so I replace cosecant with 1 over sine. Okay, so if I were to multiply this together, we would know that sine over 1 times 1 over sine, anything times its reciprocal is just 1. So 1 times the sine squared. And hopefully you know the Pythagorean identity that if I had the cosine squared plus the sine squared, that always equals 1. Okay, and if I brought this over there, okay, we should know that you can replace 1 minus sine squared with just the cosine squared of phi, or of some other random angle variable. That is your favorite. Okay, so we still do algebra with all these things. All of the properties of numbers and fractions apply to these trig problems. Okay, so this last example, number 37 from some random book on some random worksheet, says, how can I simplify the cosecant over the cotangent? Okay, since there's nothing to distribute, I'm going to go right away to rewriting these in sine and cosine. So the cosecant is known as 1 over the sine. Okay, and then there's our division bar right here that separates the things. And I'm going to do it in a different color. The cotangent is the cosine over the sine. Okay, so rather than having cosecant over cotangent, I now have 1 over the sine divided by the cosine over the sine. So a fraction, in essence, I have a fraction divided by a fraction. Since nobody likes fractions, we're going to try to get rid of them, especially division of a fraction. So rather than dividing these fractions, I'm going to multiply by their reciprocal. Rather than dividing by a fraction, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So I still have 1 over sine, and I'm going to multiply that instead by the sine over the cosine. Okay, the reciprocal of that thing. Okay, so we can tell when we multiply and you have the same thing on top and bottom, those divide out to 1. So when I multiply these things together, I end up with 1 over the cosine. Okay, and then our last trig substitution, 1 over the cosine, is also known as the secant. Okay, and that is a single trig thing, so that is where we're going to stop. So the cosecant divided by the cotangent could also be found by simply taking the secant of that angle.